Good afternoon. My name is Michael Eaton, and I serve as the Executive Director of National Model United Nations. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the closing ceremonies of our 14th National Model UN DC Conference. Only 2 days ago, we began our first virtual conference with live speakers, our Conference Secretary General Daniel Sweeney and Hillel Lowe, representing the Undersecretary General for UN 75, as well as a message from the real Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and a video celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. I was particularly struck by the final video. Among the distinguished representatives were heads of state and youth delegates, and at one point, the President of the General Assembly. If you were listening carefully, he called on the global community to build back better. Now, at first, I thought that's an interesting choice of words for a diplomat. On the one hand, the results of a fairly significant election were declared yesterday, where Build Back Better was a campaign slogan of the now president and vice president-elect. But then I wondered if maybe I was just showing a US-centric focus. So like any Model UNer, I started to research, and I immediately found that there is actually a UN context to that phrase. The concept of building back better was first used in 2015 in the context of the United Nations Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, adopted in June of that year by the General Assembly. It was proposed by the Japanese delegation as a holistic concept to use disaster as a trigger to create more resilient nations and societies than ever before. Today, in the year 2020, I think there are several disasters to choose from. The COVID-19 pandemic is the most obvious, and here in my home country, hurricanes in the southeast and wildfires in the west. And both in the United States and around the world, there is definitely a need to create more resiliency as we work toward achieving the global goals. We must come together as a global community. So as we gather virtually this afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are in the world, at the conclusion of NMUN DC, I would like to take the opportunity to say thank you. At different points in this ceremony, we will acknowledge specific groups who make the conference possible. But before that, I would like to say a personal thank you to you, all the delegates. As I visited committees, despite the virtual format, it felt to me like Model UN, and your energy and enthusiasm came through. In case you hadn't noticed, and I know you have, it's a bit of a mess out there, and we need you. So thank you to all of you, faculty advisors, head delegates, volunteer staff, and most importantly, you, the delegates, for your hard work in making the conference a success and demonstrating our hope for the future through the energy with which you have tackled difficult topics, and even as you have experienced some of the frustration of compromise. I would also like to thank you on behalf of the National Model UN Board and NMUN DC Advisory Group, many of whom are present at the ceremony. Our board members are Professor Chrissy Estep, Richard Murgo, Eric Cox, Thera Watson, Francine D'Amico, Amira Ismail, Rashid Naim, Patrick Parsons, Tina Zappilli, and Chaldeans Mensah, and DC Advisory Group members Matthew Bolton, Pam Chasek, Christopher Haynes, Jess Mace, Chase Mitchell, and Angela Shively. And the NMUN headquarters team, including Director of Programs Paul Van Cura and Program Associate Jess Hopeman. I'd also like to thank all of you on their behalf for your commitment to making a difference as global citizens. Please join me now in acknowledging all of the hard work of delegates, faculty, volunteers, staff, and board members that make this conference possible. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Prudence Bushnell. When the American Bar Association International Law Section awarded retired Ambassador Prudence Bushnell the Francis Shattuck Security and Peace Award in 2020, it recognized her contributions to the cause of international security and peace during her Foreign Service career. As Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Department of State's Africa Bureau in the mid-90s, she was responsible for coordinating interagencies policies to conflicts in Liberia, Burundi, and Rwanda. During the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, her efforts to bring attention to the slaughter were featured in the 2005 film, Sometimes in April, in which she's portrayed by actress Deborah Winger. Later, as US Ambassador to Kenya, Ambassador Bushnell led the community's response to the 1999 Al-Qaeda bombing of the US Embassy in Nairobi. As US Ambassador to the Republic of Guatemala, she served as a forceful advocate for labor and human rights, using innovative ways to help implement the 95 peace accords that brought an end to years of internal conflict. Her final assignment as Dean of the Leadership and Management School at the Foreign Service Institute enabled her to extend leadership lessons learned to State Department colleagues. After retirement, she continued her focus on leadership and national security, founding the Levitt Leadership Institute at Hamilton College and publishing her book, Terrorism, Betrayal, and Resilience, My Story of the 98 US Embassy Bomb. She continues to speak about the importance of transformational leadership and explores what leadership looks like in real life by posting articles from people she admires on her Marketplace of Leadership Stories on her website, prudence.com. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Ambassador Bushnell.
Thank you and congratulations, it's almost over. I want to end where one of the speakers began, which is to talk about how do we go about building back better. And as far as I'm concerned, from my experience, if you want to do better, you need to create change, and that requires transformational teamwork and transformational leadership, hence my topic. Having spent many, many decades in training, one of the things that I learned about learning is the importance of taking a couple of steps back and simply reflecting on what has happened so that we can process some of the takeaways. So what I want to do this afternoon is to briefly talk about transformational leadership, ask you some questions, and then get to my story about how I discovered transformational leadership in the aftermath of the Al-Qaeda bombing of my embassy in 1998. Transformational leadership, what is it? It's a fairly new concept of leadership style that is gaining momentum as the century goes on. And it is held particularly in contrast to transactional leadership. We are all so familiar with transactional leadership because if you are going to school, if you are working in a federal institution or in many other older organizations, you are operating in a culture of transaction. This is where your professor says, welcome to my class. Here is what you need to do for me to give you an A. You give me what I want, and I will give you the extrinsic award of a good grade, a recommendation, whatever it is. So transactional leadership is based on negotiated goals, often individual rewards, lots of do's and don'ts about how we do and don't. And when you succeed, you get an extrinsic reward, money, pay raise, good grade, whatever. Focus very much is on the leader. Transactional leadership, very different. Transactional leadership comes into focus when we are all coming together to accomplish a shared vision, not just goal, and to do it because that vision and the goals that are within it are important to us. We share the values, we share the progress, the hopes and the fears when we move backwards and forwards, and we do it together. And the result is not money, it is the satisfaction of having made a difference. Okay, let's take a couple of minutes and look at your experience over the past couple of days through a transformational leadership framework. The gurus, the theorists, have talked about 4 I's to transformational leadership. So let's go. I, number 1, is inspirational motivation. What brings us together is a vision, and what motivates us to go forward is that shared vision. So, question, what inspired you over the past few days? What issues did you find compelling? What people did you find compelling, and why did you want to remain engaged? So think about it. You don't have to answer it right now, but just think in the future. What inspired me? What was it that motivated me? Number 2, intellectual stimulation. People who are engaged in transactional leadership, because by nature it's change, they're looking at stimulation, and usually stimulation that requires head work. The bottom line of the intellectual stimulation is changing the status quo and encouraging new ways to do things. So, when did you find yourself challenging the status quo over the past couple of days? What were you talking about that made you want to think differently? And what kinds of creative thinking, creative thoughts, new ways of approaching old problems came up? Idealized influence, that's I, number 3. And idealized influence essentially is up to the leader. It is a question of earning the trust and the respect of the people with whom you are working and serving as a role model. So if you want to idealize your influence, then you're intentional about what your behavior is, because you know people are watching, and you want people to model the behavior you want to see in them and you are using. The final I for transformational leadership is individualized consideration. And that means just not looking at everybody as a member of a group, but actually acknowledging individual differences and individual contributions. I happened upon transformational leadership in retrospect. In 1998, August 7th, I was in my third year, coming up to my 3rd year as US Ambassador to the Republic of Kenya. We had known from the day that I took office, I had known that this was a very dangerous building, highly vulnerable, did not meet any of the security standards of the Department of State, and I began sending back messages to the department that this is not only dangerous for our workforce, but the fact that our embassy has the community medical operations, our community commissary, our video club, and so forth, means that we are bringing members of our community into a dangerous workplace. I was told to stop nagging, and that just made me more compelled to keep pushing back, because we also knew that there was an Al-Qaeda outfit in town, although I had been told that it had been disbanded. August 7th was a beautiful Friday morning. Went to work, had a staff meeting. At 10:35, I was in a meeting on the other side of a very small parking lot when our staff meeting continued, when 3 Al-Qaeda perpetrators with 1,000 pounds of TNT drove up into the small parking lot behind our embassy and detonated their payload of TNT. Within seconds, 213 people died instantly. A public bus full of passengers waiting at the stoplight were all incinerated. Thousands of people were wounded because the perps had first thrown a stun grenade, which brought people to the windows. Up to 700 businesses were blown up. Within the embassy, we suffered, I would calculate, 50% casualties. 48 people, 48 US government employees died, 12 Americans and 36 Kenyans, and our building and operations was blown to smithereens. Talk about building better. We had to build up, period. As I look back and found over the subsequent 10 months how we got through this, it dawned on me, it became clear that what we were practicing was transformational leadership in real life under very, very difficult circumstances. So let me start with intellectual stimulation. Well, you know what, friends, there is no more intellectual stimulation than looking around and seeing that everything you have has been blown up. We had no desks, we had no job descriptions, we had no medical supplies, and we who were literally in the rubble had to figure out how to pick ourselves up, bring back our organization, assist Kenyans whose GDP fell between 5 and 10% with that blast, and help one another to heal in the process. There is no greater intellectual stimulation you can get than starting out from zero. And what I realized that my job as the community leader and ambassador was not to tell anybody how to do, because God knows I didn't know how to do this stuff. People closest to the work knew how to do it. My job was to create a environment in which mistakes were allowed. We could go ahead and try things, and if it didn't work, we could try something else. And if somebody needed resources, it was my job to get it. We also had, fortunately, people coming from all around the world, the Foreign Service world, to help us. They too were given the, end quote, intellectual stimulation of helping us build up ourselves out of the rubble and back into a new normal. Idealized influence. All right, that was my job. I wanted to set the tone from the very beginning on how I was going to behave and how we could behave toward one another. I had come in as ambassador to Kenya, as I said, 2 years old earlier. And one of the things I had been told was that Nairobi had terrible morale, always has, always will. Too bad, good luck, goodbye. And really, if somebody says something has always been this way, then you've got a transformational leadership opportunity available. And I made teamwork and community part of the policy objective of our senior staff. So we took terrific policy challenges, as in stemming corruption, created interagency teamworks, as you have created inter teams to address the problem, and went ahead as we spent a lot of time urging the community to organize themselves to volunteer, and I did my part to volunteer. When we were, after we were blown up, I took I refused to wear black. That was, I mean, as a woman, you guys don't have these things to think about. We do. And I very deliberately decided to wear the brightest colors I ever had, because I was not going to let Osama bin Laden see me in black. I was going to be in the pink. I wanted folks to see that this ambassador who had been injured was nonetheless alive and well and wearing red today. Thank you very much. I also, in the hope of serving as a good role model, began to tell my senior staff, and by the way, I was the only woman on my senior team. So people were particularly looking at me and how I was going to respond. I gave permission to cry. Was very careful not to become hysterical, but I didn't mind seeing people If people saw me cry, it was the most perfectly human thing that I could do. And as we went along, I was telling people what I was doing to try and keep myself up and going. And one of the things that I did was to go through a program of Reiki. I don't know how many of you know about Reiki, but it is a Japanese form of chi where you realign your energies. I came into senior staff meeting one day and told the guys who were there, we talked about work, and I said, I want all of you to know that I'm going through a Reiki program. I'm finding it very helpful. If anybody would like the name of the people doing it, I'll be happy to give it to you. I walked out after the meeting, and three of the guys came afterwards and said, Ambassador, we're so happy that you're finding Reiki helpful. We're following the RAD method. Has anyone heard of the RAD method? Repression, alcohol, and denial, they said, and it's working really well for us. All right. Thank you very much. That's your role model. I had to, as the ambassador, model something else. Individualized consideration, recognizing and supporting individuals. I can tell you that every human being responds to disaster differently. They certainly respond to trauma and personal and emotional tragedy and injury. When we were blown up, the people who were alive in the embassy, who were able to survive the blast, came out, reorganized themselves on the front steps, and went back in to become their own first responders. So we were a community of people who had stood by our wounded, who had collected the body parts of our dead, and who again came immediately back into trying to resurrect our community. I might as well have wished my brown eyes blue as to get anybody to respond differently from the way he or she did. And it was my job to keep clear and open communications so that I could understand what was going on, and we could get in sync to accomplish the goals we had. That included, if you have individual consideration, you also need to include dissent. A moment of dissent came that literally changed so much. Toward the end of my tour, I had gotten a telegram cable, how we communicate with the Department of State, about what to do with the building in which we had been working when we were bombed. The building, fortunately, was never going to be inhabited again. The US government had a 90-year lease on the property. We wanted to turn it into a memorial park so that no one would ever forget what happened on that corner. Department of State came back and said, we don't do memorial parks. Which part of no do you not understand? Your job is to tear the building down, grass it over, and give the land back to the Kenyan government. It was, I don't know, maybe 6-8 weeks before I left. I had a very difficult, hard time back and forth with Washington on a number of issues. And this one was one clearly that was shut in Washington's view. I related to our senior team, and one of our agricultural attaches spoke right up and said, you can't do that. You can't do that. You know what's going to happen. One of President Moi's cronies is going to grab the land, as they have been doing all over Nairobi. They're going to put up a hotel, an apartment house, a building, and no one will ever know what happened. And I had one of those oh shit moments when you know that the person who is dissenting with you is absolutely right. So here is what we did. We raised the building, we grassed it over. Groups in the embassy went out to the private sector, the Kenyan business sector, and the American business sector to get the money for a park, to design a park, and to create a foundation. My job became to persuade President Moy to donate the land for a park. And I did that very diplomatically. Some of you probably have been doing it over the past couple of days. I went to every minister I knew had his eyes on the land and parlayed individually, talked to him, batted my big brown eyes and said, Mr. Minister, would you please support me in my request to have this land turned into a park? They did. Last time, the last president who went there was President Obama to lay a wreath. Numbers of secretaries of state have been there since. And had it not been for one person telling the ambassador, you cannot do that, there would not have been a peace park on that corner. So individualized consideration, not only about how people may be causing difficulties, which you need to respond to if you're a leader, but also how individuals can come up with absolutely brilliant ideas. The last I that we came up with was inspirational motivation. Before again, that was my job. How do you motivate? How do you motivate a community that has been blown up? Well, I could do it because I knew my community. You all could probably do the same thing within the community you now know. The first night of the bombing, I said, we're going to get through this, and we're going to get through this together. I made a policy decision, and we put it on our embassy newsletter and sent our policy goals back to Washington. And number one was put people first. Take care of your people and the rest will take care of itself. A mentor once told me, and he was right. And as we continued to march forward, going forward and backward sometimes, every day, my ambassadorial mantra was be kind to yourselves and be kind to one another, because that was how we were going to get through this disaster, continuing disaster. When I left, I thought I had done a pretty good job. However, I noticed that no one was making any fuss about the fact that I was leaving, and I was pretty put off because, you know, when the boss leaves, you usually have at least, you know, a farewell drink or something, and time was going on, and no one was saying anything, and I went from being really proud that I was such a good leader, I was entirely disposable, to being really upset and frankly a little pissed off that I was so disposable that nobody seemed to mind that I was leaving. The day before we were to leave, we had my husband and I had the usual last minute things we had to do. And one of them was to stop by the home of the deputy chief of mission, the number 2 in charge. And we turned up on his driveway, and here were 800 members of the Nairobi embassy community who had pulled off a surprise party for me. Their message to me was, you did good. Go in peace. We are okay. As I look back and read what the leadership theorists are now talking about, transformational leadership, there are aspects that I just told you about that I can directly relate to and say, yes, indeed, that I saw this take place. Two things that these theorists have missed, please. Number one, great leader, aha. A group can exist without a leader cannot exist without a group. So all of this talk that we are hearing and everything you're reading about leadership, well, guess what? We also need to think about team membership, group membership, community membership, because if you don't have a community, you're not going to get a leader. And what I found was that community membership, effective group membership, is using the same skills that you use as a good leader. And I went on to see a number of our members of our team become ambassadors and senior leaders themselves, and I knew they were going to be good because I saw them in action as members of my team. So if you're going to be a leader, don't forget you're only there because there's a group. The second thing that we desperately need, and I'm appalled that the theorists miss it, is trust. Trust. If you do not have trust, you cannot have transformation or any kind of effective leadership and teamwork. What is trust? Trust is the confidence that you are going to be physically and psychologically safe. I could not keep my community physically safe. I tried. I couldn't. I failed. They did not lose trust because they knew that I had tried. As you go out and you look for leadership opportunities, you're not going to have to look very far because I suspect you have been dealing with the kinds of problems over the past couple of days that give you leadership opportunities aplenty. The one that I would put on your agenda first and foremost is trust. How do you keep the trust you have created among yourselves? And how do you expand that trust so that we can become a global community that is going to overcome climate change and social injustice and pandemics as a community and as people engaged in transformation? On that note, I want to end where your earlier speaker began, which is build back better, build back with trust, build back with your community, and please have a wonderful time because you all are owning the world. This boomer is saying, over to you. Here's the gavel, Daniel. Thank you very much, and good luck to all of you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bushnell, for sharing such a personal example of what it can be like to be a senior diplomat in a crisis. You are clearly a transformational leader, and to try to use your four eyes, thank you for your inspirational example, the intellectual stimulation of your remarks, and the individualized contribution you've offered this afternoon. It will influence Model UN delegates who are people with the ideals that will change the status quo. As an organization, we are grateful to the volunteer staff for the substantive and logistical conference support. Please join me in welcoming the NMUN DC Secretary General, Daniel Sweeney, to introduce the staff and for comments on the conference. Danny.
Thank you, Michael. I will now give the floor to NMUN DC's Undersecretaries General, to highlight both the work, your work, and that of our volunteer staff this weekend. Please join me in welcoming Emma Ogg, Courtney Indart, and Adam Wolf.
Thank you. My name is Emma Ogg, and I had the privilege to serve as the Undersecretary General for the United Nations Population Fund, overseen by Director Vikram Sakya and Assistant Director Ashley Rollheiser, the United Nations Environment Assembly, overseen by Director Katie Conti and Assistant Director Alexis Evans, and the General Assembly First Committee, overseen by Chris Duggan and Assistant Director Allison Urich. In UNFPA, delegates discussed justice and equity in sexual and reproductive health and care, including funding structures, culturally sensitive programs, providing aid in previously inaccessible areas, eradicating female genital mutilation and gender-based violence, and women's healthcare and reproductive rights. The committee adopted 2 resolutions by acclamation. And in UNEA, they discussed halting biodiversity loss through information sharing, public-private partnerships, habitat monitoring and restoration, minimizing plastic waste, and addressing urban sprawl and sustainable infrastructure. The body started out with 11 working papers, which they merged into 4 resolutions adopted by the body. The General Assembly First Committee worked on confidence-building measures in the field of conventional arms, adopting 6 resolutions on the power of CBMs in the areas of information sharing, transparency, and illicit trade of conventional weapons. The committee put forth working papers early on with several proposing CBMs relating to stockpile management, reporting and tracking, and tracing of conventional arms. Please join me in recognizing the excellent work of the staff and delegates in all 3 of these committees. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Courtney Indart, and I am proud to have served as the Undersecretary General for the General Assembly Second Committee and UN Habitat and Information Services. The General Assembly Second Committee was overseen by Director Simone Arias and Assistant Director Akiko Teramoto, and UN Habitat overseen by Director Caitlin Hopper and Assistant Director Emma Bott. And I also oversaw Information Services, which was overseen by Director Anna Willett, Network Manager Zach Stubbs, and our Assistant Directors Caitlin Marcotte, Janet Ikizi, and Lisa Huynh. The General Assembly Second Committee voted to discuss financial inclusion of rural and underserved communities. The delegates worked collaboratively with enthusiasm and adopted 5 resolutions, which discussed providing additional resources for financial literacy programs through educational initiatives, improving access to financial resources by revitalizing traditional and technological infrastructure, and closing existing gaps to include the remaining population of those unbanked. In UN Habitat, they discussed, amongst other things, UN Habitat, building smart cities to implement the new urban agenda. The delegates worked diligently to adopt 3 resolutions which addressed issues such as accessing the internet and ICTs, promoting access to sustainable housing, and adopting plans to fit country and region-specific needs. Last but not least, in my group and in Information Services, our staff fearlessly managed the technical side of this conference, and we're supporting our committee staff during every session. You probably saw a few of them. Please join me in recognizing the excellent work of my staff and the delegates in all 3, in the 2 committees and Information Services. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Adam Wolf, and I am proud to have served as the Undersecretary General for the Economic and Social Council, overseen by Director Ali Tu and Assistant Director Allison Keltzer. The United Nations Human Rights Council, overseen by Director Miranda Coleman and Assistant Director Anthony Basse. The United Nations Security Council, overseen by Director Zachary Parker. In the Economic and Social Council, delegates addressed promoting gender equality in investment and entrepreneurship by recommending solutions aimed to address both issues. They put forward solutions to help achieve long-term goals such as access to education, public-private partnerships, creating tracking metrics to measure progress towards global gender equality. They passed 4 draft resolutions, with all 4 by consensus. In the United Nations Human Rights Council, delegates addressed the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in regard to the progress on women's empowerment. Delegates tackled gender-based violence, access to education, and female representation in government, among many other challenges that women and girls face across the globe. They passed 3 draft resolutions, all 3 by consensus. The Security Council engaged in meaningful discussion on the protection of civilians in armed conflict, including adopting 2 draft resolutions on peacekeeping that emphasize the role of women in peacekeeping, border security, reporting, and information sharing. Both draft resolutions were passed by consensus. The Security Council also discussed an urgent issue on the situation in Ukraine, where they passed a presidential statement outlining possible courses of action to be taken to uphold peace and stability. Please join me in recognizing the excellent work of the staff and delegates in all 3 of these committees.
Thank you to Adam, Courtney, and Emma, and the entire volunteer staff who did an excellent job in facilitating the work of committee this weekend. This is my 6th year as volunteer staffer for National Model United Nations. And what has kept me coming back each year is the opportunity to work with such an accomplished group of staffers every time. What truly amazes me about this group is the wide range of activities they do in their real life. Some work in international affairs, but they also teach in grammar schools, handle supply chain logistics. They are students, some work in finance, others in tech, and one is a dentist. But what unites them all is a belief that lasting positive change comes from building a consensus. And no matter where you are, you have the opportunity to do just that. Having completed this weekend's simulation, you too are now part of this truly elite group of individuals. You too know what it means to work with individuals who you've never met before and can potentially have very different values and goals, but still find a way to come together to create something that can make a lasting positive impact on the lives of others. Our world today is in desperate need of leadership. We must come together to find the path forward, and as the theme of our conference has been, to build back better. But in truth, the world is also too big for any one person to solve all of these problems. So instead, I urge all of you to leave here today with the intention of slicing the change. Find something that you can make better. Maybe that's at your university, or it could be in your local community or place of work. And use what you've learned here this weekend to build a consensus that lets you implement some lasting positive change that helps the lives of everyone. This experience will go with you wherever you are. And you will now be looked at as someone who will lead in complex situations. And as Ambassador Bushnell just highlighted, build trust amongst a diverse set of stakeholders to solve difficult problems. I look forward to seeing your successes and following your leadership very soon. And so as we draw to the end of the closing ceremony, are there any points or motions on the floor? No, I'm not doing that.
Thank you, Danny, for an outstanding year. Your leadership over the past year has contributed significantly to the quality of learning at NMUN. And despite your wish to skip over the awards process, we'll continue with that next, but not before recognizing your innovation, your integrity, and your calm approach to working through complications of shifting from an in-person conference to a hybrid event, and eventually our first virtual National Model United Nations. Your leadership has simply been outstanding, and I thank you. National Model UN advances understanding of the UN and contemporary international issues and has positively impacted the lives of numerous delegates. We urge all delegates and their faculty advisors to maintain an appropriate perspective regarding the awards. No one can observe every individual's action in committee or judge learning and growth. The fundamental basis of the simulation is collaboration and cooperation among nations, which includes working together through multilateral diplomacy. There are no winners and certainly no losers in this process, since we believe participation in the simulation is its own reward. The overall awards determination process is based on remaining in character, participating in committee, and proper use of the rules of procedure. A complete explanation is found on our website, and the awards announced tonight will be distributed electronically in the next week by email to the faculty advisor or head delegate. First, the Outstanding Position Paper Awards are judged by committee staff. Please join me from home in acknowledging the recipients in recognition of their outstanding preparation through their position papers. This afternoon, Washington, D.C. Timing Committee, the outstanding delegates, which are voted on by peers in each committee, were also announced. Would we please take a moment to recognize with the applause track all of those recognized for their individual contributions in committee. And finally, the overall delegation awards based on work during NMUN. They are given in the categories of honorable mention, distinguished delegation, and outstanding delegation. Recipients are not announced in any sort of point order. The first category is honorable mention. Honorable mention delegations are Baylor University, representing Thailand and the Russian Federation and Security Council. Brigham Young University, representing Turkey. California State University Northridge, representing Cameroon. Florida Atlantic University, representing Peru. Montgomery College, representing Japan. Northwestern Polytechnical University, representing Switzerland. Pace University, representing Paraguay. Pepperdine University, representing Armenia. Rutgers University, representing Iraq. Seton Hill University, representing Niger. Suffolk University, representing Saudi Arabia. Syracuse University's Maxwell School, representing China. Texas Christian University, representing Tunisia. The University of Texas at Tyler, representing Luxembourg. Valdosta State University, representing Italy and El Salvador and UN Habitat. And West Virginia University, representing Pakistan. Please let us show our appreciation for the preparation and hard work of these delegations. The next category is distinguished delegations. Collin College, representing Norway. Florida Atlantic University, representing Botswana and the Netherlands. Lone Star College, representing Rwanda and UNIA and UNFPA. Montgomery College, representing Israel. Rock Valley College, representing Vietnam. St. Petersburg College, representing the Republic of Korea. Tallahassee Community College, representing Mexico. The University of Arkansas, representing France. The University of Texas at Dallas, representing Sudan. Universidad San Francisco de Quito, representing Indonesia. Valdosta State University, representing the Czech Republic. And West Virginia University, representing India. Let us again show our appreciation for the preparation and hard work of these distinguished delegations at the 2020 NMUN. The final category is the outstanding delegations. Baylor University, representing the United Kingdom. Florida Atlantic University, representing Austria, Cambodia, Ukraine, and the United States of America. Georgia State University, representing Ethiopia. Irvine Valley College, representing Ecuador and Kenya. Riverside City College, representing Eritrea. And the University of New Haven, representing Australia and Estonia. Please let us give a final round of applause for these outstanding delegations and for all the delegations, including the friendships that were formed here at NMUN DC. NMUN invites you to participate in our annual conferences here in DC each fall and in New York City each spring, as well as our annual non-US conferences, which rotate each year, including upcoming conferences in the Czech Republic, Japan, Germany, and the Galapagos Islands of Ecuador. Let me acknowledge in particular the presence of participants in China, France, and Japan for their commitment across many time zones to participate in this simulation this weekend. And I'd also like to invite those of you who might be interested in being part of our staff to watch Facebook for announcements about staff applications. An email will also be sent to faculty advisors and head delegates. And at this time, it's my privilege to introduce the 2020 Secretary General to close the conference.
Thank you, Michael. At this time, are there any points or motions on the floor? Emma Ogg, to what point or motion do you rise?
Thank you, Secretary General. Somewhat sadly, I move to adjourn the meeting until next year.
Thank you, Emma. At this time, delegations feel free to comment on YouTube or Facebook your yay or nay. Seeing an outpouring of yays, I now declare this, the National Mall United Nations DC 2020 conference, closed.
Congratulations, everyone. A few last announcements. Again, those of you receiving awards certificates will be emailed to the advisor or head delegate. Stay tuned for anyone interested in staff applications. The dates for next year's conferences: New York will be held the 28th of March through the 1st of April 2021 and the 5th through 9th of April 2021, and the DC conference the 5th through 7th of November 2021. And to close out the conference, for those of you that joined right on time, we have a slideshow with some images of the past weekend that we will use to end the podcast. Thank you for joining us. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.